The wind swept through the empty plains, carrying with it the scent of sage and gunpowder. The sun burned low over the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with orange fire. A lone rider moved across the land, his coat flapping against the saddle, his hat pulled low to shade his eyes from the glare. The frontier stretched endlessly before him, wild, untamed, and cruelly beautiful. Every ridge and canyon held a story, carved into the dust by men and women who dared to call this place home. The West was no country for the weak. It belonged to those who endured. He had no name worth speaking, only a past buried beneath the desert sands. Once he'd been a ranch hand, maybe even a soldier, but the years had stripped away those titles like bark from a dead tree. Now he was just a traveler, moving where the wind pushed him. His horse's hooves struck sparks off the rocks, echoing through the canyon walls. Somewhere ahead lay a small town, nothing more than a cluster of wooden buildings clinging to life at the edge of civilization. The kind of place where whiskey, dust, and secrets flowed in equal measure. When he reached the town, the streets were nearly empty. A saloon door creaked in the wind, and a single lantern burned weakly over the entrance. He dismounted, boots sinking into the dirt. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and regret. A piano played off-key in the corner, and a few tired faces glanced up as he walked in. The bartender nodded wordlessly, sliding a glass across the counter. The whiskey burned his throat like fire, but it was a welcome kind of pain, the kind that reminded him he was still alive. In the corner, a woman sang softly, her voice carrying a sadness deeper than the canyon outside. She was dressed in red silk, her hair dark as midnight, eyes sharp enough to see straight through a man's soul. The cowboy watched her for a moment, drawn not just by her beauty but by something else, a story she wasn't telling. When the song ended, she walked over and asked, "You just passing through?" Her tone was careful, curious. He nodded. "Ain't we all?" he replied. She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed wary. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The first drops of rain in months began to fall, tapping softly on the saloon roof. The woman looked toward the door, then back at him. "There's trouble coming," she whispered. "Men from the north, hunters, not of animals but people. You'd best ride on before they find you here." He set his glass down slowly, his expression calm but unreadable. "I've seen trouble before," he said. "It never stays gone long." She nodded, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Then may the wind favor you, stranger." When the storm broke, the town vanished under sheets of rain and lightning. The cowboy saddled up and rode into the tempest, the sky roaring like a wounded beast. Water streamed down his hat brim and the wind tore at his coat. Ahead, through the flashes of light, he saw figures on horseback, 5 of them moving fast. Their silhouettes were dark against the storm, their rifles glinting in the flashes. He pulled his revolver free, thumb resting lightly on the hammer. The frontier had no mercy for hesitation. He spurred his horse toward the ridge, rain splashing against the rocks. The gunfight came sudden, sharp, and loud. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like fireflies. Bullets tore through the air, shattering stone, tearing bark from the trees. The cowboy ducked behind a fallen log, returning fire with calm precision. One rider fell, his horse screaming into the storm. Another turned tail and vanished into the rain. When silence finally returned, only the wind remained, moaning through the canyons. The cowboy stood slowly, the rain washing the blood and dust from his coat. He holstered his gun, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Trouble had passed, for now. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the world clean and golden. The cowboy found himself on a hill overlooking the valley, where the sun rose over an endless stretch of land. Below, the town smoked gently, alive again after the night's fury. The woman from the saloon stood by the riverbank, her red dress bright against the pale dawn. She looked up as he approached, her expression softer than before. "You could stay," she said quietly. "This land could use a man who doesn't scare easy." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "The wind doesn't stop, ma'am." "Neither can I." She watched as he mounted his horse, the saddle creaking beneath him. "Then where will you go?" she asked. He looked out toward the horizon where the sun painted the world gold. "Where the stories aren't finished yet," he said. With that, he turned his horse westward. The wind caught his coat and lifted the dust in swirling patterns behind him. The land stretched endless and open, a canvas of danger and dreams. Every hoofbeat carried him deeper into legend, into the place where courage met loneliness, and the frontier swallowed everything but the soul. The woman stood there long after he was gone, listening to the fading rhythm of his horse's gallop. The saloon behind her began to stir with life again, laughter rising with the sun. Yet she knew that someday his trail would cross hers again. The frontier had a way of bringing stories full circle. In the desert wind, his name was already turning into a whisper. A legend passed from one dusty town to another, and so the Wild West lived on, not just in blood and dust, but in the hearts of those who dared to remember the man who rode with the wind.